One of the things I've learned from talking to you over the past few times we recorded is you can change the directions of genetics through selective breeding. And one thing I've seen a lot of over my gardening career over the past 15 years is the rise of hybrids, especially around tomatoes. And I want to have this kind of philosophical breeding talk and like what might be possible and what are we missing here? Because you have a lot of heirloom tomatoes that at one point in time had exceptional flavor, color, taste, all of that. But then with the rise of a lot of diseases, hybrids became more popular because they had these disease packages that could outperform the heirlooms. So that breeding has really became popular for commercial growers. And I want to discard like things like shelf life, transportation. Like that's not what I'm talking about here. Could heirlooms be saved? I guess is the overarching question that I'm going with here. When you have evolving disease, is it, as you said, I think in a past episode, a lack of work being done on these varieties that's holding them back? So in other words, if we're growing the same mortgage lifter tomato that we grew in 1935 and we grow it in 2025, did we do that breed variety a disservice by not adapting it to modern ecological conditions? Or could we have never gotten it there and the rise of hybrids with better disease packages was inevitable and the heirlooms could have never kept up?
Okay, so that's a really good question, Diego. So I don't know all the answers to that, but I can tell you this is that with any kind of even hybrids, with any kind of vegetable, you have your limits. A lot of what I grow, if I was in, let's say, a cold, wet, rainy climate, let's say, even if it was Alaska, but it was raining all the time, I wouldn't be able to grow it. It just wouldn't do because the varieties I have, they just can't take their roots soaked all the time. With tomatoes, I believe there's certain limits that they can do, and you could be pushing the limits in some ways. A lot of people, instead of using hybrids, they choose to
Draft.
graft. Yeah, they choose to graft. But I do believe people discount selection. And okay, people, if you discount selection, then you shouldn't eat any brassicas because how many varieties of brassica came from what one species is highly underrated. Within, I had a variety of cucumber that I turned from being one of many to being a consistent population and just this beautiful plant and selecting for color and for these different traits within 3 generations. And you can't get that if you hybridize, and it takes 9 to 10 generations for that. So even though, with that being said, it's really hard to say because there is something to say for hybrid vigor. And tomatoes, because they don't have inbreeding depression, it's really hard to get them to have that vigor unless they may have that vigor in higher populations, but not like outcrossers do. Outcrossers, if you have a high population, you get a lot of increased vigor in the population, whereas with tomatoes, that doesn't happen so much. But that being said, if you were to grow out a population of tomatoes and pick those plants that had the highest vigor, the next generation would be much more disease free. And if you were to use proper disease practices and avoid viruses and things like that, and have a good eye for things and do the work, you could make incredible strides with disease resistance of some of these older open pollinated varieties. And so I feel that, um, yes, there is a lot to say about what tomatoes can and can't do with open pollinated. I believe that there's a lot that just hasn't been done because people aren't willing to put in the work. And I really feel that those who are willing to put in the work can see a lot more progress than those kind of sitting on the sidelines. and saying it can't be done. So you have it from someone who's done a lot of things that I thought were impossible to begin with, or maybe I can't do this, but you put in the work and often you see these incredible results. And that being said, as well, I have to say this, I am terrible with tomatoes. I themselves. I have I'm no good at growing tomatoes just because of the disease issues. It almost seems like you can put me in the perfect climate with the perfect conditions and practically new soil and give me completely disease-free seeds, and I'll have something happen. And I don't know. It's just this kind of I'm not cursed. It's every other year, even if I put in new soil and start with the best possible scenario. Yeah, I can't grow an area. That means I can do well with determinants, and it seems like I do better with determinants than indeterminants. That's just me.
Yeah.
It seems as soon as tomatoes start fruiting, as soon as they put that energy into fruiting, then oftentimes a lot of them start going downhill. You see the early blight start to creep up or different spotting or coloring. As soon as the plants start giving their energy to the fruit, things start going downhill a lot with tomatoes. So, yeah.
Do you have, and I know I introduced this with tomatoes, so I don't want to limit this to a tomato discussion. Because I know the majority of your experience is through cucumbers, and I think a lot of that breeding experience can translate across vegetable types. A lot of follow-up questions. One, are cucumbers and melons grown as cucumbers, are those closer to their wild ancestors than other cultivated fruits or vegetables like a tomato, or don't know, is it a push?
I'd say some are. I'd say some definitely are. There's some varieties in India that almost seem they're mixed with. I'd say that they've been hybridized between different cucumis mellow varieties, and then so with some of the wild stuff, and so that can, I think, happen. It does sometimes happen, but yeah, with tomatoes, it does. Without crossers, it's more likely to happen, but I don't see a lot of it personally myself, unless I'm growing varieties that are quite different and come from an area in which they're grown side by side with the wild ones. For example, if you were to get some corn from a very rural area of Mexico or somewhere down in Central America, it could possibly there could be some wild corn that gets in there into the population, just as well as some of those genetically altered varieties being in the population. It's possible. It just depends on where you grow, but most of my populations don't have a lot of that influence in them. But there are some that I deal with that do have some wild influence in them, and then they tend to just be a little more vigorous in one way or another. A lot of times they'll have thinner stems and things like that, and be more bushy, just wild, weedy is what I'd say. So
Yeah, I asked because there was a study that came out a few years ago from, I think, the University of Washington or in Washington State, somewhere like that, talking about how the amount of breeding we've done has decreased a lot of the disease resistance in a lot of these modern vegetables that we're growing. The further you get from the wild, it's like we've bred out, we've selected for traits we want, and we've left some of those disease retention. Have you read disease resistance in cucumbers yourself or reduced it in any way? Have you started with something where it's like, hey, there's some problems with this from disease wise, and then solve that? Or are you doing that indirectly by selecting ones with vigor so you're not getting the weak ones that are susceptible to disease? What are your thoughts on that?
yeah, so without crossers, selecting having a higher population, selecting for vigor, those are two really good strategies. Most of what I grow has does really well with just about most all the diseases and has pretty good resistance to viruses. Everything except for one thing. Most of my stuff is not resistant at all to powdery mildew. And so I'm currently using a product that's getting more and more difficult to find. It's called Sonata and Bayer currently is the only one who produces that variety. It's a specific bacteria that goes after specifically powdery mildew. But if I run out of that, Serenade helps for a little while as well, so you can get 2 to 3 weeks longer, maybe even 4 weeks longer to the season and fight the powdery mildew if you start to see it come on. But most of my melons they have very little resistance to powdery mildew, so I have to be real careful with that. With any other disease, I really feel, yeah, a lot of times I'll get seed that's weak and old, and then I'll grow out that year, and there'll be some disease, some things that need to be pulled. But yeah, I pull them, so I don't. I have a zero tolerance for disease. Is it other than those that are obvious, like powdery mildew, it's not going to be transferred to the seed. But otherwise, like a lot of other diseases, I have a zero tolerance. If I see a plant that's weak or looks like it's got any kind of disease or problems, it gets pulled. I don't. I'm not going to let things dither and fester any kind of disease or pathogen. It's got to go. So that's how I avoid it.
I like how you said that breeding matters, or selection matters. It's important. There's power in it. You've seen this firsthand doing it. Doesn't require that many plants, doesn't require that many generations. If we're just strictly talking cucumbers and you wanted to improve something you're growing, what's the least number of plants that you'd want to play around with?
So with Cucumis sativus, I'd actually say about a dozen, because they've got a little bit more inbreeding. Cucumis mellow. Cucumis mellow, you need at least 6 to end with. That's not to start with. And then for me, to keep from having inbreeding depression, even though they don't really deal with it, but even though I select for certain traits, I continue to let bees do what they do. And so they could get something from a plant that's not as good as what I want, but I'm still getting that genetic diversity. They're still crossing. And so I just select by the fruit. And by selecting for the fruit, I don't know who the father is, but I always know the mother's you know, what I'm getting, and that really helps. So there is this one way to make really fast progress, and it's this counting technique that I use. Let's say if you want to make some really fast progress, use a specific counting technique. And it is let's say you've got 24 plants or even a dozen plants, and they're in this block. Let's say you've got 12 plants, 3x4, okay, 3x4 block. And you've got these ones on the edges, but you got some kind of closer to the middle. And let's say there's these 2 traits. There's A trait that you want, or even 3 traits, B trait that you don't want, C trait that you don't want. You just want A. So you find all the ones that have this A trait that you're looking for. You don't need to worry about what you're not looking for. You just keep an eye for what you're looking for. And then for every plant, you count how many plants around it have that A trait. For example, if I have one plant and I have 2 with A traits around it, then that'd be a 2 for that one plant. And then maybe you find another plant that has 3 plants around it that have that trait. And so that'd be a 3. And what you're doing is the higher the number, the better, because you're increasing the chances that the bee has crossed your plant with one that has the traits that you're looking for. You could also hand pollinate it as well. But let's say you have one that is surrounded by 6 plants. You know for sure that the next population is going to give you what you want. And actually, with this one variety of the Tondo di Manduria, I had grown this thing for years and years and years and years, and never been able to get the color and the shape and these characteristics I was looking for until I grew it in a bigger scale. And then I finally found one that was surrounded by 6 that had the exact same correct traits. I grew it out, and this last year I finally grew out this one that finally nobody else. I grew out seed from 8 different sources. No one else has something that's stable, the stable selection of this variety. I finally have the stable selection. I grew it out one more time just to make sure, and the whole population was stable, exactly what I was looking for. So it can be done. You need techniques that help propel you, so you can make fast progress, because life is short and we only have so many seasons we can grow and go out there and get growing and selecting for those traits you're looking for, and things will happen. Even let's say carrots, you want a certain color in your carrot, But if you pull up the carrot, you're going to kill it. Not necessarily. If you get the carrot to a certain stage where it's big enough and you grow it, let's say over the winter, you grow it so it can get big enough, then you can actually harvest the carrot. You cut off not all the top, but just a portion of the top so that the new growth can come in. And you pull up the carrot, cut off a part of it so you can look at what the coloring is, and then pull out all the ones that have the wrong coloring, put the ones with the right coloring back in, and then grow it the next season for seed. There's ways. If you really want to select for things and make fast progress, there's ways.
So not a lot of plants. That's interesting. And not very many generations. You've done this in 3 generations, which is encouraging to a home gardener or a small scale farmer, homesteader. I think people think this has to be done on a massive scale with tons of plants and it's very sophisticated, but it is just observing at the end of the day based on what you want.
Just real quick, just an aside, it depends on what crop you're working with. If you're working with like corn, they say 1,000 is your minimum that you want for really high quality corn, like a minimum of 1,000 plants. And so you have to be really careful. You want to look up what the recommended inbreeding depression kind of thing. For melons, they say it doesn't, but you can get away with less because it just doesn't have a lot of inbreeding depression. But there a lot of other ones you have to be careful with and make sure you have a big enough population. So go ahead. You were going to ask.
Here, I'm just thinking with these ones that have lower population requirements, obviously, if you don't care, you don't care. But if I care at all, I should be going into each season thinking, what's the best product that can come out of this row that I'm planting and select for that, save the seed. Like we could all do this in our own garden, whatever we determine best, flavor, color, shape, size, vigor, disease resistance, I don't know, amount of fruit it puts out, that type of thing. If everybody approached their garden that way, even if progress is slow, you're at least making some progress, right?
Yeah, so this is what I'll say. So I'll take the opposite scenario, okay? Opposite of what you want to do. Uh, Most gardeners see their garden, if they're vegetable gardeners, is the kind of you pick it kind of thing. And if you do a you pick it for Armenian cucumbers or any kind of cucumber, you go out there, you pick the very best ones, and over time, it is throughout the season, you may leave those ones that are curled or ugly or whatever. And then let's say you're like, oh, that one's got seed. So then you save it for seed for the next year. Over time, you're going to be like, please, these open pollinated ones, these plants are terrible because I keep saving the seed and it gets worse and worse. I'm just going to buy some hybrid seed. Why not? But what's happening is you're selecting for the worst traits. And a lot of gardeners and growers do this. You want to save your very best for seed. And before you even start the season, you want to say, hey, I'm looking for this. And honestly, I made a mistake this last season because you want to have some openings as well. You want to be open to be like, hey, maybe there's this other trait that I did want that I wasn't even looking for. So maybe I'll save seed of that. Just say, hey, maybe I'll save a dozen seeds of that. Say, hey, there was this cool trait that I didn't want, but I want to save that. But then you save your very best for seed. And before you start the season, you say, okay, I like this tomato or I like this eggplant or whatever, but what do I want more out of it? And then if I grow enough, will I find this trait that I'm looking for? And even if, let's say, even if you want to have, even if something requires 12 plants, but you can only grow 6, go ahead and grow those 6, save the seed, grow another 6 the next year, and then the following year, grow half of A and half of B, half of the first year and half of the second year for your third year. So then you get the crossing. So that's another way to get some of work on that inbreeding depression issue that is a small grower.
What about localization? Have you had success there? Do you have any anecdotal thoughts on that? You grew in Tucson before this. Now you're up near Sacramento. Do you think you can steer plants towards your biome? Obviously, this isn't going to apply to extreme cases. I think, and somewhere along the lines of talking to wet roots in Alaska or a really cold climate, that's at the fringe. You're not going to get there. But if I'm in a particular region, do you think I can select for plants that do well in my conditions?
Yeah, let's say, for example, you have a variety that takes 70 days to mature or something like that, or maybe the seed packet says it takes 90 days to mature. And you want, for example, there's those people trying to get watermelons up in Canada or whatever. Um, yeah, you can, if you grow a large enough population, there's going to be a percentage of the population that is grows out to maturity before that 90 or 120 days or whatever it is. And that percentage of the population, if you save the seed, will grow plants the following year where you're recentering the average days to maturity from whatever it was to you're pulling the center of that spectrum to one side to make it produce a little earlier or whatever you're looking for. There's like this memory in seeds that they remember what happened last year. I know it's not really like that, but the genetics is altered in a way that makes them so that they are more fit for the following seasons. Yes, you do acclimatize stuff, but a lot of what I deal with is by its sheer nature is acclimatized to hot and dry. Regular cucumbers, Cucumis sativus, they can deal with moist and a little cooler, but it just depends on the variety. Yeah, there's a spectrum, and it's important as you grow specific varieties or specific species of plants to get an idea of what's the spectrum of what I can deal with. Obviously, I'm not going to be growing cucumbers in the snow. I'm going to be doing all these crazy things that are way out there at a different time of the year, but there's a spectrum that I can work with.
What about seed itself? Can you tell anything from looking at the seed whether it might be better than other seeds? So one variety, you have a pile of seed in front of you. I think we talked about in previous one, heavier seed is probably going to be your preferred choice there.
Right.
So now we sort the heavy pile and it's all one type, big seed, small seed, shape.
Mhm.
Any of that have any bearing in your thoughts?
Because I send seed via envelope and I don't want the seed curled, but then all the seed I grow is good looking, healthy, that I start for my plants is good looking, healthy, straight seed. So I do alter it that way, but does that make a difference with how high quality the fruit is? I don't know. I do know that a lot of the more really curled small seed is not as vigorous or good. And I know that if there's something that shortens the life of my plants, then the seed can sometimes, especially with Cucumis mellow, the seed can be smaller than it normally would be. And that is a concern because sometimes it can be difficult to bring that back to a large size depending upon the variety. And I do have one variety with that I've been working on for 3 years now, and I'm putting it aside because I put so much work into this, and I can't get it to a place where it's marketable. But it makes really good fruit, and it's a really good variety. But the seed has these huge air cavities, so it's very light seed, and it's very gentlemen. I got them from I don't know. It's going to take some more work, so I'm sorting that one by weight, and hopefully I'll be able to get the weight to a place where I can get real high germination for the future. But it's a really good tasting variety. It just can't get it to where it needs to be yet. So it's just going to continue to take some time.
Which I think is also important to hear. It's not, this isn't miracles and unicorns here. It's not going to automatically happen. You do have to put the work in, but I think it's encouraging for
Yeah.
people that want to try, want to put in the work. It's maybe closer at hand than you expected, and it requires a lot of things that maybe we don't use enough every day. Close
Yeah.
observation, detailed records, patience, having a goal, all good things in life overall. And it just translates to the garden.
Yeah. And just like gardening in general, I start out small and start out easy. Always start with the low picking fruit. The high picking fruit may fall over time, but start with those things that are easy and small. I love to work with short season varieties because I can pack 2 or 3 in a year, depending upon how I structure things. Tucson, I could do 3 a year. Here, not as much. But yeah, start with something easy and that you know you can do. Make achievable goals. Don't think you're gonna be like an expert overnight. Just make these small little incremental increment with your selection, and you'll see varieties completely change over time in a positive way.